You don't realize you've lost control until the gate won't open. The sound hit first, metal grinding. Then that sharp click echoing through the quiet Texas air like something final had just been decided. And for a second, I just stood there, boots planted in the gravel, staring at a steel gate that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. The smell of fresh weld and burnt paint still hanging in the air, mixing with the dust I'd known since I was a kid, except now it felt foreign, like I was trespassing on my own land. 60 acres my grandfather bought in 1958, land my father ran cattle on until his hands gave out, land I'd come back to after years of working surveys across half the state. And now there was a fence cutting it clean off from the only road in or out, tall, polished, deliberate, like someone had drawn a line and decided I didn't belong on the other side of it. I didn't say a word at first, just walked up to the gate, ran my hand along the cold metal, felt the texture of fresh welding beads under my fingers, still rough, still new, and then I saw it. The lock, heavy-duty, brand new, hanging there like a statement, not a mistake, not confusion, a decision. Behind me, the gravel road stretched back toward the main county line, but ahead of me, everything, my barn, the water tank, the back pasture, was sealed behind something I never agreed to. That's when I heard the engine, soft at first, then closer, the quiet hum of an SUV rolling up behind me. And I didn't need to turn around to know who it was, because there's a certain kind of confidence you can feel before you even see it, the kind that assumes ownership before it earns it. Linda Carver stepped out like she was stepping onto a stage, heels clicking against the gravel, sunglasses on despite the early hour, that same polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Ethan," she said, like we were neighbors sharing coffee instead of standing on opposite sides of a line she just drew across my life. "We've upgraded the access for community safety." I let the words hang. There, tasted them, community safety, like that explained the fact I couldn't even reach my own front gate anymore. The air felt tighter, heavier, like the space around me had shrunk without asking permission. I finally looked at her, really looked, and she didn't flinch, not even a little, because in her mind, this was already settled, papers filed, decisions made, outcomes guaranteed. "You fence my ranch," I said, keeping my voice level, steady, the way you do when you're measuring something important. She tilted her head just slightly, that practiced sympathy. "It's all within HOA jurisdiction now," she replied, smooth, confident, wrong. And that was the moment I understood something she didn't, something none of them did. Because while they were busy building fences and writing notices and acting like control came from a clipboard, I was remembering a detail most people would have missed, something small, buried in old records and survey maps, something that didn't look like power until you knew exactly where to stand. I glanced back at that lock one more time, then at the road beyond it, and for the first time since I'd pulled up, I felt something settle in my chest, calm, quiet, certain, because they thought they'd lock me out, but they had no idea what that gate actually belonged to. I did not argue with her, not right there, not with the morning sun just starting to burn through the haze, and that brand new fence still smelling like hot steel and bad decisions. Because arguing only works when the other side is still listening. And Linda Carver was already past that point. She stood there like she had already won, like this was just another box checked on some HOA checklist. So I nodded once, slow, like I was accepting something, even though what I was really doing was measuring everything, the angle of the fence line, the placement of the posts, the way the road curved just before the gate. Every detail mattered. Every inch told a story if you knew how to read it. And I did. Because this was not just my land. This was my work, my trade. I had spent 15 years walking properties just like this with a survey rod in my hand and a map in my pocket, finding lines other people ignored, finding leverage where nobody thought to look. And as she kept talking about community standards and shared access and improvements, I was not hearing her words anymore. I was seeing overlays in my head, old boundary maps, easement lines, that one narrow strip of land most people would skip right over because it looked too small to matter, half an acre at most, tucked right where the main road narrowed before opening into my ranch. My father used to call it the choke point. Said if you ever controlled that, you controlled everything behind it. I remember laughing back then, thinking he was being dramatic, until I got older and started reading the fine print myself, until I saw how access works in this country. how it is not always about who owns the most land. It is about who owns the right piece of land. And that memory came back sharp now. Cutting through the situation like a clean line on a survey map, Linda finished her speech with that same polished smile, like she had just done me a favor, and then she turned, heels crunching on gravel, got back into her vehicle, and drove off without even looking back, like I was already handled, already contained. I stood there a few seconds longer, listening to the quiet settle again. No engines, no voices, just wind brushing against that fence and the faint creak of metal adjusting to the morning heat. I reached out and tapped the lock once. Solid, expensive, confident. They did not cut corners on this, which meant they were planning to keep it, planning to make this permanent. And that was exactly what I needed. I pulled out my phone, not to call a lawyer, not yet, but to open an old folder I had not touched in years, scan documents. Property records, the kind of paperwork most people only look at once and forget. Except I never forgot. I zoomed in on one page, then another, until I found it. The parcel ID I remembered, small, almost insignificant compared to the rest, but sitting exactly where that gate now stood. I felt that same calm settle deeper this time. Not anger, not frustration, something quieter, more precise. Because this was not about breaking their fence or forcing my way through. This was about letting them finish what they started, letting them invest time, money, and confidence into a system they thought they controlled. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took one last look at that gate, and turned away, boots crunching back toward my truck. Because if they wanted a boundary, I was going to give them one, just not the one they were expecting. I did not go home after that. I drove straight into town with the windows down, warm air rolling and mixed with the faint smell of dust and cut grass. The kind of drive I had done 100 times before, except this time every mile felt sharper, more deliberate, like I was lining up pieces on a board only I could see. The county records office sat where it always had. Same faded brick, same slow-turning ceiling fans, same quiet hum of printers and paperwork, and as I stepped inside I felt that familiar shift, like stepping out of the noise and into something controlled, something precise. The clerk barely looked up when I asked for access to archived parcels, just pointed me toward the terminal like I had done this yesterday, which in a way I had. Just not here, not with stakes like this. I pulled up the map, zoomed in, and there it was again, that narrow slice of land sitting right at the entrance, less than an acre, boxed in by larger plots on all sides, easy to overlook if you were not paying attention. But I knew better. I pulled the full record this time. Not just the surface details, ownership history, transfer dates, easement notes. Every line mattered, and the more I read, the more certain I became, because nothing had changed, not the boundaries, not the designation, not the control point. Whoever owned that parcel still held the only legal access to everything behind it, including every single house that HOA had just wrapped inside their shiny new fence. I leaned back in the chair for a second, listening to the faint clicking of keys from across the room, and let that settle in. They thought they had enclosed me, but what they had really done was concentrate their own dependency into one single point, one gate, one piece of land. I printed the documents, paper warm in my hands, the ink still fresh, and walked out without saying much. The sun was higher now, brighter, casting hard shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my truck and looked at the address tied to that parcel. Not mine, not yet, but close enough to reach. The current owner was listed as an out-of-state investment group, the kind that buys and forgets, the kind that cares more about a clean transfer than a story, which made things simpler, cleaner. I made a call right there, no hesitation, introduced myself, kept it straightforward. I am interested in acquiring your property at the entrance of Willow Creek Estates. Yes, the small one. Yes. I know it is not generating much. I can make it worth your time. There was a pause on the other end, the kind where numbers start forming in someone's head, and I could almost hear the shift when they realized this was not a casual inquiry. We talked for less than 10 minutes, just enough to establish intent, just enough to open the door. By the time I hung up, I already knew how this would go, because I had seen it before. People overlook what they do not understand, and they let go of what they think is small. I started the engine, the low rumble steady under me, and glanced back in the direction of that fenced road. Somewhere behind that gate, Linda was probably planning her next improvement, her next notice, her next move. But for the first time since this started, I was not reacting anymore. I was setting the pace. Because the difference between being locked out and holding the key is not force. It is timing. And they had just given me exactly what I needed. All I had to do now was let them keep building their perfect little enclosure while I quietly made sure I owned the only way in or out. I did not rush it. That was the first rule I learned in this kind of game. Because the moment you look desperate, you lose leverage. So I gave it 48 hours. Let the email threads breathe. Let the numbers settle on their side while I stayed quiet on mine. And in the meantime, the fence kept going up. I could hear it from the edge of my property every morning. The steady rhythm of post drivers hitting the ground. The metallic ring of panels locking into place. The kind of sound that says something permanent is being built, whether it should be or not. By the third day, they had extended it past the bend in the road, tying everything together into one clean perimeter, clean for them, not for me. I stood at a distance one afternoon, watching a crew install the final section near the gate, their truck idling, diesel fumes drifting through the warm air, and I noticed something that made me almost smile. They were not just enclosing my ranch anymore. They were enclosing themselves. Every house behind that line now fed through that same narrow entry point. The same half-acre that most of them probably did not even know existed. I could hear voices behind the fence too. Neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes along the paved stretch, normal life continuing like nothing had changed, because from their perspective it had improved, controlled access, increased security, a cleaner boundary. That is what Linda had sold them, and they bought it, completely. I leaned against my truck and let the scene play out, the sun sitting high, casting hard light across that new metal. And I thought about how easy it is to mistake structure for authority, how quickly people accept something once it looks official enough. A fence, a lock, a uniform, a title. All of it feels real until you check the foundation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I did not need to check the number to know who it was. I answered calmly, kept my voice level, and listened as the representative on the other end confirmed what I had been expecting. The property was available. They had reviewed my offer. They were willing to move forward if I could close quickly. I did not hesitate. I agreed. We went over the terms, simple, clean, no complications, the kind of deal that gets done without noise. And by the time the call ended, I could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable, like a line had just been redrawn and nobody else had noticed yet. I looked back toward the gate, that heavy lock still hanging there, still shining in the sun like a symbol of control. And for a moment, I let myself imagine what it looked like from their side. A secure entrance, a boundary they owned, a point of control they believed was theirs. And that belief was exactly what made this work, because they were investing in it, trusting it, building their routines around it, which meant when it changed, it would not just inconvenience them. It would redefine everything. I pushed off the truck, took one last look at the fence line stretching across my land, and headed back, not toward the gate. Not yet, but toward the paperwork, toward the signatures, toward the part of this that actually mattered, because fences can be built in a day, but ownership, real ownership, is something you secure quietly, on paper, long before anyone realizes what you are about to take back. I signed the papers in a quiet office that smelled like old wood and printer ink, the kind of place where decisions that change everything get made without anyone raising their voice. The agent slid the final document across the table, and I took a second before touching it, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what it meant. This was not just a purchase. This was control, clean and legal, written in lines that could not be argued away with opinions or HOA meetings. I read every word anyway, slow, deliberate, the way my father taught me when something matters. Then I signed, pen scratching across paper, simple, final. And just like that, the smallest piece of land in that entire area became the most important one. Mine. I walked out into the afternoon sun with a folder under my arm, the heat pressing down, cicadas buzzing somewhere in the distance. Everything looked the same as it had that morning. Same road, same fence, same locked gate standing there like it owned the place, but it did not. Not anymore. I drove back without rushing, letting the moment settle. Because there is a difference between knowing something is yours and stepping into it. And I was not in a hurry to show my hand. Not yet. When I reached the entrance, I did not stop right away. I parked a little ways down, got out, and walked the rest, gravel crunching under my boots. Each step steady, measured. The fence stretched out on both sides now, Complete, polished, exactly how they wanted it. I could hear voices again behind it. Someone laughing, a car door shutting, normal life moving through a system they believed was secure. I stepped up to the gate and looked at that lock again. Same heavy steel, same confident design. But now it looked different to me. Not like a barrier, more like a placeholder, something temporary waiting to be replaced. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the new key they had given me at closing. Small, unremarkable, the kind of thing you could lose without noticing. But this one carried weight, not in ounces but in consequence. I turned it between my fingers for a second, feeling the ridges, the precision cut into it. Then I stepped back instead of forward, because this was not the moment. Not yet. Across the road, a neighbor slowed down, watching me with that cautious curiosity people get when something feels off, but they cannot name it. I gave a small nod and turned away, heading back to my truck, leaving the gate exactly as it was, locked, controlled, unchanged, because the real shift had already happened and nobody else could see it yet. And that was the advantage. They were still operating under yesterday's assumptions, still trusting a system that no longer belonged to them, still believing that fence defined the rules. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, and looked out at the entrance one more time. The sun catching the metal, the lock hanging there like a promise they thought they made. And I could almost hear my father's voice again, quiet, certain, reminding me that control is not about what people see. It is about what they depend on. And right now, every single one of them depended on that gate. And that gate depended on me. I started the engine, the low rumble steady and calm, and pulled away. Because the timing had to be right. And when it was, they would not just notice the change, they would feel it, all at once. The first sign something shifted was not loud. It was subtle, almost easy to miss if you were not paying attention. A delivery truck stopped at the gate longer than usual. The driver stepping out, checking the lock, looking around like something did not add up. I watched from a distance, engine off, window cracked just enough to let the warm air carry the sound of his boots on gravel. He pulled out his phone, made a call, waited, then finally turned around and drove off. No entry, no drop-off. Just a quiet interruption in a routine that used to work. That is how it starts, not with a confrontation, but with friction, small disruptions that ripple outward. By mid-afternoon, I could see it building. 2 cars lined up near the entrance, one of them idling, the other backed up behind it like they were unsure who was supposed to move first. Someone got out, walked up to the gate, tugged at the lock. Same result, same confusion. From their side, everything should have been working. The system was complete, the fence finished, the gate secured, but systems only work when the foundation matches the assumption. And theirs did not. I stepped out of my truck slowly, boots hitting the gravel with that same steady crunch, not rushing, not hiding, just present. One of the homeowners turned when he saw me. Recognition mixed with something else, uncertainty, like he was trying to place where I fit into this new version of the neighborhood. Gate's not opening, he said, casual at first, like it was just a minor inconvenience. I nodded once, glanced at the lock, then back at him. Yeah, I said, calm. That tends to happen when access changes. He frowned slightly, not fully understanding yet, because from his perspective nothing had changed. The fence was still there, the lock was still there, everything looked exactly the same. And that was the point. I let the silence sit for a second, long enough for the question to form without me having to ask it. Then I reached into my pocket, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for him to notice. The small key catching a bit of sunlight as it turned in my fingers. His eyes followed it, confusion sharpening into attention. You manage this gate now? He asked. And there it was, the shift in language, not accusation, not authority, just a recalibration of who held what. I did not answer right away. I stepped closer to the gate, close enough to hear the faint rattle of the chain in the breeze, and looked at the structure they had built, the fence, the lock, the controlled entry they believed defined ownership. Then I looked back at him. I own the land it sits on. I said, simple, factual, nothing extra, and I watched it land, slow at first, then deeper as it connected to everything else, the road, the houses behind him, the way in, the way out, all of it running through one point they never thought to question. Another car pulled up behind us, then another, engines idling, conversations starting, pieces of confusion stacking into something heavier, and I stayed exactly where I was, not raising my voice, not forcing anything, just letting the reality settle in around them. Because control does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself when the system stops responding. And right now their system was very quiet, waiting for a key they did not have. The air changed before she even stepped out of the car. That same white SUV rolling up slower than usual. Tires crunching over gravel like it was testing the ground instead of owning it. And when the driver door opened, Linda Carver did not carry that same polished confidence she had 2 days ago. It was still there, but thinner now, stretched over something she had not planned for. She looked at the line of cars, the closed gate, then at me, standing exactly where I had been, not blocking anything, not forcing anything, just present. And that seemed to bother her more than anything else. "What is going on here?" she asked, her voice controlled but sharper at the edges, like she was trying to keep authority from slipping through her fingers. I did not answer immediately. I let her walk up, let her see the lock, let her process the situation the same way everyone else had, piece by piece instead of all at once. She reached for the chain, gave it a firm pull, metal clinking against metal, no give, no movement. The same result everyone else had already discovered. And that is when she turned to me fully, eyes narrowing slightly, recalculating. "Why is this gate locked?" she said, slower now, more deliberate. And I could hear it in her tone. She was no longer explaining. She was asking. And that shift mattered. I held her gaze for a second, then glanced at the gate, then back at her. "It has always been locked," I said, calm, even. "The difference is who holds the key." Silence settled in for a moment, not empty, but heavy, like something had just landed that nobody could ignore. She studied me, searching for something, a mistake, an angle, a way to pull this back into her control. "This access is managed by the HOA," she said, firmer now, leaning into the authority she was used to. I nodded slightly, like I understood the claim. Then reached into my pocket again, slow, steady, and held up the key just enough for her to see it, sunlight catching along its edge, small, simple, undeniable. "The land this gate sits on is not," I replied, just as steady, and I watched it connect, not all at once, but in layers, her eyes flicking briefly toward the ground beneath the gate, then back to me, then toward the road behind her where more cars had started to line up, engines idling, people watching, waiting, the system she built. Now pressing back on her from every direction. "That is not possible," she said, but there was less certainty in it now, more reaction than control. I did not argue. I did not need to. I simply reached into the folder I had brought with me, pulled out a single page, and held it out. Not aggressively, not like evidence in a courtroom, just an offer, a fact on paper. She hesitated for half a second before taking it, eyes scanning, moving faster as the details settled in. Parcel number, boundary, lines, ownership transfer, all of it clean, all of it recent, all of it real, the kind of real that does not bend just because someone does not like it. I could see the moment it landed, subtle but unmistakable, the way her shoulders shifted, the way her grip on the paper tightened just slightly, the way her next breath came a fraction slower, because this was not a violation she could write up or a rule she could reinterpret. This was structure, this was law, this was something she had not accounted for. Behind her someone asked what was happening. Another voice followed, questions stacking, pressure building. And for the first time since I had met her, Linda Carver did not have an immediate answer. She stood there between the fence she ordered and the gate she did not control, holding a document that rewrote the entire situation. And I did not step closer, I did not push. I just stood there and let it settle. Because this was the moment everything turned, not with noise, not with force, but with a single realization that could not be undone. They had built a boundary, but they had built it around the one thing they never owned. The silence did not last long. It never does when people realize something they relied on is no longer guaranteed. Voices started layering over each other behind Linda, questions turning sharper, more urgent, someone asking why they could not get out, another asking who was responsible for the gate. And for the first time, the answers were not coming from her. They were coming from the reality sitting right in front of them. She looked back at the line of cars, then at me again. The paper still in her hand like it had weight now. Real weight, not just ink. "This needs to be resolved immediately," she said. And there it was again, that instinct to command, to restore order by declaring it. But this was not something she could schedule or vote on. I shook my head slightly, not dismissive, just factual. It already is resolved. I replied, calm as before, this is private access now. That word hung there, private, not community, not shared, not managed, private. I could see the shift ripple outward. Homeowners exchanging looks, some pulling out their phones, others stepping closer, trying to understand how something so visible had gone unnoticed. Linda stepped forward, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a negotiation instead of a performance. You cannot just block access to an entire neighborhood, she said, controlled but tight. I met her halfway, not physically, but in tone, steady, grounded. I am not blocking anything, I said. I am controlling my property. I let that settle for a second, then added, the same way you thought you were. That landed differently, quieter but deeper, because it mirrored her own logic back at her, stripped of the assumption that she was the one holding it. A man behind her spoke up, frustration clear now, asking what it would take to fix this, and I turned slightly so he could hear me just as clearly. Access agreements, I said, simple, direct, legal, documented, agreed upon. No threats, no demands, just terms, the kind that should have existed from the start. Linda exhaled slowly, eyes moving again across the fence, the gate, the people behind her, recalculating not just the situation but her position inside it. Because this was no longer about enforcing rules. This was about regaining something she never actually owned. We will need to review this, she said, stepping back into structure, into process, and I nodded once. You should. I replied, because until then, this stays closed. I did not raise my voice. I did not gesture. I just let the statement sit there, complete on its own. Behind her the line of cars had grown, engines idling in the heat, patience thinning, reality pressing in from every direction. And for the first time since this started, nobody was looking at the fence like it solved anything. They were all looking at the gate, at the lock. At the one point everything depended on, I slipped the key back into my pocket, the metal cool against my palm for just a second before it disappeared, and I stepped aside, not leaving, not retreating, just giving space for the moment to fully land. Because this was the part most people rush, the confrontation, the explanation, the victory. But the truth is the real shift happens in the quiet seconds after, when people start adjusting to a new reality they did not choose. And right now that adjustment was happening all around me. Slow, uncomfortable, undeniable. They built a system to control me, but what they actually built was a system that only worked if I allowed it. And for the first time, they understood that. It did not take long for the paperwork to catch up with reality. By the next morning, there were fewer cars at the gate and more conversations happening behind closed doors, quiet ones, the kind where people start reading documents they never thought mattered. I showed up just after sunrise, the air still cool, the metal of the gate holding on to the night. And for the first time since all of this started, it was quiet. No line of vehicles, no raised voices, just the soft hum of insects and the faint creak of that fence settling into the ground. Linda was already there, standing a few feet back from the gate. No sunglasses this time, no performance, just a folder in her hands and a posture that looked more measured than confident. She nodded when she saw me, not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledging what had shifted between us. I walked up to the gate, boots steady on gravel, and waited. She opened the folder, pulled out a set of documents, and handed them over without a speech. I read them the same way I read everything that matters, slow, line by line, access. Agreement, shared maintenance terms, liability clauses, all of it structured, all of it clear, no assumptions, no gray areas, the kind of agreement that should have existed before a single post went into the ground. I flipped the last page, felt the weight of it, then looked up at her. This works, I said, simple, because it did, not because she fixed the situation, but because she finally acknowledged what it actually was. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting for a day, maybe longer, and gave a small nod. No victory in it, just acceptance. Behind her, a couple of homeowners stood at a distance, watching, not tense anymore, just aware. I signed where it needed to be signed, handed it back, and for a moment, everything felt still, like the air itself was waiting for the next move. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key, and this time I did not hesitate. The metal slid into the lock with a clean, precise fit, No resistance, no drama, just a quiet alignment of what had always been true. I turned it, heard that same click as before, but this time it meant something different. I pulled the chain free, pushed the gate open, hinges moving with a low, steady sound, and the road beyond it opened back up, not as a favor, not as a concession, but as a controlled access point defined by agreement, not assumption. A car rolled forward slowly, then another, passing through with that cautious awareness people have when something familiar has changed meaning. Linda stepped aside, giving space, not directing anymore, just part of the system instead of above it. I stood there for a second longer, watching the flow return, measured, orderly, real. Then I stepped back from the gate, letting it rest open, the morning sun catching the metal, warming it, turning it from a barrier into something else entirely. And as I turned to leave, I glanced once more at the fence stretching out across my land. Still there, still solid, but no longer defining anything on its own, because the truth was simple, and it always had been. They thought control came from building walls, but real control comes from owning the way through them. And now everyone understood exactly who held that.